was the one that God chose and said, I'm going to make you the father of all nations. I'm going to give you children like the grains of sand on the ocean shore. And so Abraham is a father to many peoples. The tests that Maimonides identified that God put to his most beloved Abraham, that he told him first of all, that's how the story begins in chapter 12, he says, you feel at home where you are? You feel nice and comfortable where you are? You know everybody? Your family is all here? All of your networking is here? I want you to leave. I want you to leave all that behind. Go to a strange land. People that you've never seen before. I want you to leave your homeland and go to a strange land. His first test. After he gets there, he doesn't find all nice, comfortable, and a comfortable environment. He finds a famine. And then the Egyptians capture his wife Sarah. Abraham faces odds in the battle of 4 of the 5 kings that he has to fight. He marries Hagar after not being able to have children with Sarah, so there's that whole thing. And then God tells him to get circumcised at an advanced age. That's of special interest maybe for men who might think about that. And then the king of Gerar captures Sarah, intending to take her for himself. God tells him to send Hagar away after having a child with her. His son Ishmael becomes estranged, and that's a whole series of tests and stories that we as Christians need to hear and to digest, but we're not doing that today. And then finally, the 10th one, today, what we hear today, God tells him to sacrifice his son, Isaac, upon the altar. So in the Jewish understanding, God has chosen this Abraham as a special son, and with a special promise. And the way he shows that is by a series of tests that bring Abraham further and further in faith. So that later on, in a Christian context, Paul would point to Abraham as the father, not just of nations, but the father of faith, of true faith. Many commentators have concluded that this passage, in a Jewish understanding, is essentially a story of the origins of God's message to human beings, that he doesn't want the sacrifice of children anymore. It's really the story of the end of sacrifice of children. And there's a good case that can be made for it. But some of the other interpretations, here's a quotation from Harold Hasenov, a teacher of religious studies at Grinnell College. He said, when I was a young boy studying at Yeshiva in the Bronx, I never heard my teachers say that the binding of Isaac was an especially problematic text. They told us instead that it shows how Abraham loved and trusted God above all things. The binding of Isaac teaches the world that sacrifice of children must end once and for all. Jonathan Sacks, the chief rabbi of Britain, concurs. He says, the most important message of the binding of Isaac is that a civilization is judged by the way it treats its children. So an indication of how, if we take a different view of a passage, we can come to different answers. Because I haven't got to this, but you see, a Christian Bible, by tradition, has looked to this passage as a foreshadowing of the death of Jesus on the cross. Jesus really did die on the cross. Isaac didn't die on that stone altar. Jesus really did die. And Christians experienced a redemption in that terrible death that didn't make any sense at all. And so the earliest Christians looked to find ways to understand this redemption, this spirit life that they were given as they lived into the resurrection. How to understand it. And they would look back at texts in the Bible. The Jewish Bible was still the Bible for Christians. There wasn't any Christian Bible at that point yet, right? They looked back at the Bible And they found this text. And they said, this gives us a hint of what redemption is like in a Christian context. And so they called it the sacrifice of Isaac. Old Bibles, you will see that heading in Genesis chapter 22, the sacrifice of Isaac. And maybe indeed he was sacrificed in some way. As I said, imagine looking at your father holding a knife over you. It would have been seared into Isaac's imagination. And so he was changed. In that sense, he was sacrificed. He was given to God. But in a Christian context, it is a lens through which to see the redemption of Jesus Christ. Sacrifice. I don't very often do this, but it seemed to me of some value in today's message as I have it, that to offer you a definition of the word sacrifice. That is a word that I think is, for most of us in today's world, is not an easy one to grasp a hold of. The temple in Jerusalem has long been destroyed, and it's been a long time since sacrifices were offered on the altar at the temple in Jerusalem. It's possible to go see sacrifice. I think they're Buddhist sacrifices, you would say, of different sort of things. I see them out on the out at the Global and out by the ocean, out in various places, and in various shrines. But Christians, at least, don't have an ongoing experience of what sacrifice is all about. In the ancient world, it was an essential part of religious life. But the word itself is really made up of two very simple sort of words. And I think we can begin to grasp what it is. It's made up of the Latin word for holy, and the parallel we have in an English word would be sacred. So sacrifice, sacred, means holy. Together with the Latin word for make, facere. So the word in its basic definition means to make something holy. How do you make something holy? I mean, in some sense, Amory made something holy just by giving birth. Yeah? How did you do that? Making something holy is kind of a mysterious thing, I think. And it has to do kind of essentially with living it out. It isn't essentially the sacrifice that we think of in terms of blood sacrifice, which is what it came to. Sacrifice of Isaac, sacrifice of Christ on the cross. Things that we don't really have words to explain. But it makes them holy and makes us holy. The questions the passage puts to us, I think, are something like, do we believe and worship a God who manipulates and plays with his creatures, which is one way to read that text? Or is it a God who loves his creatures so much that he will go to any length to bring them into his family, into his fold? Do we worship a God who flirts with terror and horror, almost for the fun of it? Or do we worship a God who, and that's why the song, One of Us, means so much to me. Do we worship a God who wants to become a slob like one of us, who live oftentimes in horror and terror, in order to bring us to a place of rest and peace? Do we worship a God who ultimately cares very little for our lives, or one who puts before us the choice of life and death in order to bring us to the fullness of life that only he can give? Obviously, I've asked the question in such a way that I've given away the answer. I think that we are here because we worship a God of life new life, of redemption, and of love beyond measure.